Hello, everybody, and welcome to the penultimate session in the Global 16 Days Campaign 2025 with Equality Bahamas. I am Alicia Wallace, she, her pronouns, and I am really excited to be continuing this campaign with a conversation about health. I don't think we talk about health quite enough, especially in concrete terms, about what is impacting our health particularly as women, as Black women in the Bahamas, and the agency, the power that we have to make decisions and to take on particular activities, whether it has to do with our food or our environment or the way we move our bodies to improve and maintain our health. So it's really great to be here with Dr. Indira Martin, who has been thinking and researching and writing and presenting on this quite a bit. We heard from Dr. Martin at the Future of Democracy conference in October of this year. And it was really, really interesting and just started like sparking things off in the brain. And I thought, this is somebody we need to talk to during the Global 16 Days campaign because this is a campaign against gender-based violence that disproportionately impacts women. And we know that gender-based violence isn't just interpersonal, it's also structural. And it includes barriers to accessing critical services that include healthcare. And not just healthcare, but health overall. So, the cost of food, the difference between buying fresh produce and food to cook versus just getting some fast food, time poverty, and what that means for the decisions that we make for ourselves and for our families. So we're going to get into this with Dr. Martin. For folks joining us, we do center women and LGBTQI plus people in the space. So when it comes time for discussion, where we welcome you to share your questions, ideas, comments, challenges, we will be prioritizing folks of those identities as far as we're able to determine them. But this is a space that's open to the public, and we welcome your participation. So now I'm turning over to Dr. Indira Martin. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and not just what you do, but who you are as a person and how you exist in the world. And then just, yeah, take us through what you have prepared for us today.
All right. Well, thank you very much to Equality Bahamas, to Alicia Wallace for the welcome and for the opportunity to present here in this very important forum looking at gender-based violence. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you. So just a little bit about myself. I think I would describe myself as a busybody, basically doing a lot of stuff all the time. I'm really interested in, well, a lot of things, but I'm really interested in the intersection of the social world, social society, and the medical world. So how social conditions and environment impact health in general. And that is a side interest that I have. I'm very interested in mushrooms. I grow mushrooms. So basically just a nerd in every sense of the word. But my actual job is that I am the director of the National Reference Lab at the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And there, what I specialize in is molecular medicine. And that basically means looking at disease and health at the molecular level. That means looking at DNA, looking at proteins, looking at cells. And in particular, I have a focus on infectious diseases. Was very involved at the forefront of the COVID pandemic and building capacities in HIV and so on and other viruses. So that's kind of the meat of what I do and who I am. And as I said, thank you again for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure to talk about something very close to my heart. I love the framing of this, the reclaiming health framing, because I think reclaiming health, a lot of it has to do with reclaiming humanity. And a big part of our humanity is our self-efficacy, believing that we can do something and then going and doing it. basically is what self-efficacy is confidence and believing in the outcome that can come from our action. I believe that self-efficacy can be an extraordinary biomedical strategy for optimizing health in the Bahamas and in the world in general. So it's something that I try to practice in my own health strategy. And so I've gotten very interested in it and happy to be here to sort of explore it further and discuss with the persons on the call about it. So I am by my training a biomedical scientist. And what is a biomedical scientist? Asks many people sometimes, and I tell them that's what I am, especially a Bahamian biomedical scientist. And honestly, I have the real luck, the fortune, and the pleasure of being able to practice science in the Bahamas. And it's very, like I said, lucky, very exciting. And so what I am as a biomedical scientist is someone who uses scientific methods in laboratories to investigate diseases, analyze patient samples, and conduct research, playing a crucial role in diagnosing illnesses, monitoring treatments, and developing new cures and diagnostic tools, working at the intersection of biology and medicine to improve human health. So over the course of my career, I've had the fortune of participating in many aspects of biomedical science. My PhD is in preclinical science. I was looking at a potential treatment for a childhood brain cancer called medulloblastoma. In my more recent career history, I've been working more in diagnosing disease, particularly using molecular tools such as polymerase chain reaction, aka PCR, which was made famous by the COVID pandemic. So the public no doubt knows about PCR. So I've worked in a number of different facets. Just going back to the beginning of my career, after I finished my A levels back in 2001, I went off to do my first degree in genetics at the University of Edinburgh, which was one of the top universities globally for genetics. So this was a really exciting time in 2001 for me in my career. As you can imagine, I was very I knew what I wanted to do. I was very specific. I knew I wanted to go into genetics and I wanted to go to Edinburgh for it. So it was truly exciting to be able to go there. And at this time, it was a really exciting time for genetics. The Human Genome Project was towards the end. It wrapped up in 2003. So in 2001, it was like sort of about to wrap up. And it was a very exciting time. The lead of the project, Dr. Francis Collins, joined the general hyperbole of the day around this project and said, "It is humbling for me and awe-inspiring to realize that we have caught the first glimpse of our own instruction book, previously known only to God." So I was very into this idea that perhaps once they sequenced the human genome, we would be able to get to the source of human disease in general. The reason why this was possible or thought to be possible was because the genome consists of a molecule called DNA, which I'm sure everyone would have heard about. And the thing about DNA is that it is encoded by 4 different bases, which are given the letters A, C, T, and G. And basically, by the sequence of these letters, we can get an idea of which proteins will be produced by the organism, in this case, the human. And going just to briefly review some basic molecular biology, the thing about DNA is that it leads to the production of proteins. So it's kind of like the recipe book for the proteins that are produced by the cell in the body. And the thing is about proteins, if you have a bad protein, that can cause disease. So the thinking was, if we can look at the recipe book and it's a bad recipe, then we can say this person has bad proteins and then possibly understand the disease a bit better. But it turned out there was more to the story. Although I went to Edinburgh to study genetics, I actually changed that later on to molecular biology for reasons that will hopefully become clear as I go through this presentation. So you have your recipe book, which is the human genome, which is the DNA. But in addition to that, there is this additional regulatory layer called epigenetics. And epigenetics is essentially all of the mechanisms that control the gene expression, with the notwithstanding the actual genetic code. So you could have the most wonderful recipe book, the best genetic code in the world, but if these epigenetic mechanisms do not allow for that gene to be expressed, then the protein will not be expressed, and then it will be as if you didn't even have that code. So epigenetics is a very important aspect of how the cell expresses these genes. As you can see in the picture there, the human chromosome is not just naked DNA lying around in the cell. It is wrapped around this protein material. These are called nucleosomes. And nucleosomes are themselves tagged by these chemical modifications, which can, as you see on the right there, which is kind of a blow up of that little section of DNA with the nucleosome on it. These chemical tags, in particular DNA methylation, which is the addition of methyl tags to the nucleosome, this can lead to the gene either being silenced or turned off or activated and being turned on. And so what is important about this is that the on-off switch is actually controlled to a great extent by the environment in which the organism exists. So this means that we are not just purely controlled by our genetic code, as was some of the hyperbole around the Human Genome Project, but we are also, and importantly, impacted by our environmental condition. So critically, our life circumstances, our choices and our exposures can impact epigenetic modification and influence gene expression and thereby influence protein expression. What we eat matters to our epigenetic expression and our epigenetic landscape. Are we active? That has an impact. Do we smoke? Do we have companionship? And so on. These things have a great impact on whether our genes are actually expressed from the underlying DNA. And this is an age-old debate in biology, nature versus nurture. What is more important, especially in the manifestation of disease? There have been arguments for centuries about this, and the Human Genome Project actually helped to answer some of these arguments. But it's not what we thought it would be. And like most things, it's a nuanced answer. What constitutes each of us and that disease risk is, yes, our genes, our DNA, but also our environment and lifestyle. So these things interact with each other to control who we are. But that being said, most diseases are not caused by a genetic mutation. Diseases caused by a genetic mutation are actually very rare. Huntington's disease is one example, but the majority of disease is caused by the majority of disease is chronic disease. That's the majority of what people tend to suffer and die from. And chronic disease is manifested, yes, by genes and environment, but the majority of the impact is actually environmental and lifestyle. In this study by Rappaport, a seminal study in 2016 in which he studied twins, identical twins, he was able to delineate and sort of parse the relative contribution of the genes versus the environment. And what he found was that in all of these chronic diseases, these are cancers, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so on and so forth. There was some contribution of genes, but it was minimal compared to the environmental exposure impact. So what does this mean? This means that to some extent, particularly with pertaining to lifestyle, obviously people can't help their access, their condition, and so on, but to some extent, at least at a societal level, there is a lot that is under our control in terms of preventing and treating disease, especially chronic disease. And this is why self-efficacy has become understood to be an important biomedical strategy for optimizing health. And what is self-efficacy? So Bandura, who's a key theorist in this field, he has theorized it as an individual's belief in his or her capacity to execute behaviors necessary to produce specific performance attainment. So this is basically the confidence and the belief, the self-belief that you can do something and then doing it. And self-efficacy reflects confidence in the ability to exert control over one's motivation, behavior, and social environment. So at least from a public health perspective, I'm a public health official now as a lab director of a public health lab. Thinking about this as a biomedical scientist, I'm not going to give up, in this instance, we're not doing a pill or a treatment as I might have been trained to do, but how would you administer self-efficacy at a public health population level? Bandura has again outlined the facets of self-efficacy, and these can be adopted, I believe, at the public health level to integrate into the public health response to these diseases that we're seeing in our environment. So he talks about mastery of experience. So you start small. You don't need to jog a mile maybe on the first day. You jog to the corner. And then the next day you feel as if I've done something. I know I can jog to the corner, and maybe you can push a little further than the next day. Verbal or social persuasion, saying you can do it, just even to yourself. Negative self-talk is the opposite of self-efficacy. Victorious experiences, so again, reflecting on what you've done well. Maybe you only had a salad on Monday, one salad for the week, but reflect on that. You did well. You took a step. That helps with self-efficacy. And physiological and affective states, another aspect of self-efficacy. You have to be able to, so for example, anxiety is either a stressor or it's a motivator. So sort of reconceptualizing things that we're going through can also assist with self-efficacy. And the exciting thing about self-efficacy is that because of epigenetic programming, it actually allows us at an executive level, what we call the self, can executively program our epigenetic state based on our health behaviors that are seated in our self-efficacy. So studies have shown that exercise, for example, can reprogram epigenetic states in the muscles, which can lead to reduced inflammation, for example, and increased immunity. We can exercise mindfulness. This has been shown in studies to alter epigenetic states, leading to decreases in stress and inflammation in particular. And my pet sort of topic is nutrition, and how nutrition can really alter epigenetic states in a meaningful way and impact disease, leading to better health outcomes and longevity. And it's literally, again, this is not a pill, this is not a treatment, but it is something that can be taken and can lead in a dose-responsive way to health outcomes, improved health outcomes. So this study shows that, this is looking at how many daily steps are taken in different age groups. The blue is in the over 60 and the orange is in the under 60. So what it's showing is that basically people who, the more steps people take, especially in the older group, the less likely they were to have died in the period of the study. And it was less than half of the risk of death. So the more steps you take, the less likely you are to die. It's a very simple point, and I think everyone knows it, but this data actually shows it in a way that is scientific. And what a lot of bad happened during the COVID pandemic. There were a lot of deaths. It was a horrible time, but a lot of good has come out too. You can't forget. What has come out in particular is that there's been an awareness raised that health is not just a pill, health is not just a gene, it is also how we are treating our bodies at the executive level. And one of the things that's come out from the WHO and from other health bodies, this is from the American Heart Association, and it's again a very simple statement, but it's factual and it's science-based. Food is medicine. So food is actually medicine. And this goes back to a very ancient concept. Imhotep, who was, I think it was maybe up to 10, I'm not sure how long ago, but it was thousands of years before the birth of Christ that Imhotep lived. And he was the original physician, the father of medicine, and a multi-genius. Actually, he built the first pyramid as well. And he's accredited with this statement, let thy food be thy medicine and thy medicine thy food. So somewhere along the way in medicine, this concept has kind of dissipated and become lost. Nowadays, we are taught to look externally to pharmaceuticals often for health. And although I'm not saying that that's not a source of health, there's a lot that we can do on the level of self-efficacy and particularly with regard to nutrition to impact our health states. And the reason why is because bad food, stress, sugar, fat, and toxins, these things cause for what is called redox imbalance, an imbalance in redox homeostasis. What is redox? Redox is basically, so there is, if you're taking in a lot of these foods, these sugars, these fats, they overload the mitochondria. And the mitochondria, as a result, tends to overproduce and leak out these little fireballs called reactive oxygen species or free radicals. And these little fireballs sort of dart around the cell and destroy the cell membrane and basically burst the cell open. And this leads to chronic inflammation. First of all, cell death, the cell dies. And then this leads to chronic inflammation. And ultimately, in this positive feedback loop, there's cell, tissue, and organ damage, which leads to chronic disease. And plant polyphenols, which are compounds within plants, they actually have the capacity to rebalance this redox homeostasis that is imbalanced by these bad foods and stress and toxins. Because they are antioxidant, which means that they combat those reactive oxygen species that are darting around the cell and destroying all the cellular structures. They're also anti-inflammatory, which means that they can cause for there to be less of this sort of feedback loop of this unending feedback loop of cell death and inflammation. And importantly, they can enhance immunity. So during the COVID pandemic, for example, it was discovered that persons who had a healthful plant-based diet were actually less likely to have been hospitalized for COVID. You're going to get COVID, but it was more likely to be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. So this is really exciting in terms of the fact that the scientific world is now catching up with, again, an ancient concept that food is medicine and that maybe we should focus a lot of our energy, especially as public health officials, on ensuring that people are getting the plant polyphenols that they require in order to fight disease, not just chronic disease, but also infectious disease. It is a big, it is a very important component of fighting infectious disease. So the WHO actually recommends a plant-based diet. Again, it's shocking that this isn't being shouted from the rooftops. I think that there should be millions of dollars put into this as a social engineering project to ensure that people have a baseline level of health that so that they can contribute to society in a more wholesome way, above and beyond their own well-being. So the WHO recommends fruit, vegetable, legumes, nuts, and whole grains at least 5 portions per day. We're not doing that in the Bahamas, and that is why we have so much disease, not just chronic disease, but a lot of violence, a lot of trauma, we have depression. All of this is linked to a poor diet, lack of access to healthful foods. And again, this is just another piece of data showing that in a scientific sense, in a dose response sense, if you give people a plant-based diet, in this sense, this was a Mediterranean diet, which is based on plants and fish, seafood as well, nuts, and also extra virgin olive oil is a big component of the Mediterranean diet. And you can see here that the risk of cardiovascular disease is almost halved by persons being on a Mediterranean diet. So very strong evidence that this is, it's not a pill again, but it's a dose response to, and in this clinical trial, a plant-based diet that increased the health outcomes and improved the health outcomes of the participants. So the other part of this is that although what we call the self lives in us and is the executive to a large extent over some parts of us, obviously we don't control our heartbeat, but we can control whether we go for a jog tomorrow morning. So we have the self, but we are really a composition of many different microorganisms in our body, and particularly in the gut. The gut of the human being consists of many different types of bacteria. And the interesting thing about these bacteria is that they are able to influence our health behaviors. So I actually, just as an anecdote from myself, at the beginning of this year, I actually stopped eating sugar. And at first it was very difficult because, you start getting cravings. And it's almost like a voice in your head. Like I've been addicted to like tobacco, for example. It's that same voice of you just have a little bit more sugar, And that voice, to some extent, studies have shown, is coming from the bacteria in your gut because of the gut-brain axis. So the bacteria in your gut are manufacturing little molecules that are making you hunger for sugar and all of these bad things. So an obesogenic, what is called an obesogenic gut, which is a gut that is of an obese person or leads to an obese phenotype. That type of gut actually self-reinforces. So an obese person will have these cravings for obesogenic foods, sugars, fats, and all of these other bad foods. Whereas someone who is lean, someone who's eating a healthy diet, now that I've stopped eating sugar, I have a gut microbiome that is much more conducive to my overall health. So sometimes just taking that first step, it's hard at first to take the sugar or the fat out of the diet, but eventually you will find that the gut microbiome actually starts to reinforce your healthful behavior just as it used to reinforce your unhealthy behavior. And the reason, again, is because of this gut-brain axis. The gut is speaking with the brain all of the time, and it is telling the brain, it's impacting the brain. And this also has importance for neurological disease. So dysbiotic gut, this is a gut that has bad bacteria, so to speak, just for lack of a better phrase, this actually leads to things like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's and depression and stress and other neurodevelopmental disorders, including violence in our community. That is also related, it's been shown. So I love this slide because I didn't even mean for it to look like a horror movie, but it did. All I had to do was take KFC, Wendy's, and McDonald's, their mascots, and put it on a slide, and you can see that they look like villains, and they are, in my view. In my view, we are really at war, and the battleground is actually the human bodies, especially in a post-colonial context such as the Bahamas. The war is at the level of our bodies. And self-efficacy is one of the tools in our arsenal that will allow us to take control, because we can take control of our bodies to some extent. The Bahamas is a place where we are on the doorstep of America. We have access to the worst of American food, and food is very expensive here. We don't grow our own food. This is a public health crisis that we are in. We cannot build a hospital out of this. We can't pill our way out of it. The only way that we are going to get out of this public health crisis that we are in is by a dramatic change in our behaviors, not just at the individual level, but at the societal level. Public health officials and the government in general has to make food accessible, healthy food accessible to the general populace, because it's about national security, it's about national development, and it's about cost, because we are all paying for this public health crisis with our taxes, and it's way above our ability to actually pay for already. We need a revolution and something very dramatic to happen in the Bahamas. Not just for us, but because the future generations are at stake. The reason why they are at stake is because of this phenomenon of epigenetic inheritance. If you are a man and you are eating poorly or smoking or engaging in unhealthy behaviors, this is impacting the epigenetic states in the sperm. The sperm and the egg come together, and the sperm gives half of the genetic material to the newborn. So the epigenetic damage that has happened in the sperm can impact the newborn infant. For a woman, it's even worse, because the woman carries the newborn infant. So not only does she have to concern herself about, at the moment of conception, whether she has, for lack of a better word, bad epigenetic states, but also when she is carrying the child is in the womb. So whatever she is exposed to, the child is also exposed to. But not only the child also has gametes. So these are sperm and egg developing in their, in the developmental stage. So these can also be impacted. And now one day, that little unborn baby is going to grow up to be an adult and will give birth to a child, and they will pass on those epigenetic states. So we're talking about not just one generation, not just two generations, but 3 generations at least, and possibly more, that are impacted by the health choices that we are making today. So this is urgent, and it's about the future. And I will just close by saying something that that helps me a lot, and it's simple, but I think it's important. It's a quote by Paulo Coelho. So he says, "Change, but start slowly, because direction is more important than speed." So hopefully, at not only the individual level, but again at the public health level, we can begin to reorient. I know that we might not be able to run the full race tomorrow, but we need to reorient towards the science. What is the science saying? That we must change our behaviors with regard to diet and exercise in particular, in order to produce more healthful states. And that is the way that we overcome this looming threat of biomedical and public health collapse in the Bahamas. So thank you again for the opportunity to Alicia Wallace, and I'm happy to receive any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So much to not just think about, but to action and figure out how to action, I think. For folks who are with us on Zoom or watching on Facebook, you can share your questions and comments in the chat if you have any, or you can use the raise your hand function in Zoom if you'd like to hop right in, unmute, and share your thoughts, questions, comments, and challenges. Maybe just to get us started, there are two things that you said that really jumped out at me. And one was this sort of the idea that we can take small steps toward improving health. Like one day you might make it to the corner and then maybe you can make it a little bit further. And then towards the end, you mentioned that we're in a critical situation where we need some serious action. So I'm wondering how we hold these two things at the same time.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think that's a great question. Um, I I think that at least I find in my, again, speaking personally, I find it actually quite surprising how just writing something down, an intention down, can actually really guide my movements in a way that is, you look back at it a year later and you'd be like, wow, you look back at something you wrote down, and you'd be like, wow, look, I did that, you know? So I think the major issue that we have right now, if I'm frank, and I work within the Ministry of Health, so, and I like my little job, so I don't want to be too frank, but I want to be honest, that I'm shocked that there isn't, not just at the Ministry of Health of the Bahamas, but I think globally, that there isn't more emphasis on what the science is showing, and just even writing down that intention of we must ensure that people are getting plants. As simple as that, plant polyphenols. I mean, the human organism, Homo sapiens, we are a primate organism. We're primates, and we have evolved to be plant-based. So there's something very strange about us. Some people don't eat plants ever, other than maybe the wheat flour that is in bread or whatever, and these sort of really highly processed versions of plants. Some people do not eat fruit. I know a lot of people who don't eat fruit. So I think that even having an orientation, a statement from the Ministry of Health that a plant-based diet, a Mediterranean diet, is the recommended way to avoid cardiovascular disease. I haven't heard really that statement. I mean, there's some of it, but it hasn't been crisply said. And a lot of it is because of money. It's about capitalism. The pharmaceutical industry has sort of taken from us I even grew up, believing that health and you need pills to be healthy. Somehow you need pills to be healthy, and that is a part of health. So I think that, again, going back to the original theme of reclaiming health, there has to be this reorientation back to using what we have, what we know works. It's simple, but it works. We need to study it. It has to be evidence-based. But basically, just having that orientation is so key to ensuring that we take that first step in that direction. I think that would be such a triumph, to be honest with you. And from there, sometimes the ball just rolls down the hill, or often the ball just rolls down the hill. When you start, especially when you start putting resources in that direction. So I think that's how those two things can sort of unite. We need to turn away from where we are and turn towards, what the science is saying, basically.
Yeah, I think when we talk about health and what we can do, the almost automatic response is all of the reasons why we can't do it. Um, Food being a big one, huge, right? People are saying we have limited money. There is only so much I can do with this paycheck. I have all these bills to pay. I have X number of children and other responsibilities for, parents, grandparents, whoever. And this money is not going that far in the grocery store. So I need to buy the like frozen, I don't know, what people buying chicken nuggets or, whatever it is. And I need to visit the fast food establishments often because it's quick. It seems expensive, but it costs me less than to buy all of these things at home. And it saves me time because I'd rather spend that time on the drive-through than getting home really tired and having to cook a whole dinner. So, there are all of these layers that create these barriers. So it seems like we can't even really address it just with the Ministry of Health, right? It also has to be the way that taxation works. It also has to be how we view agriculture and how we're preparing people to be able to grow their own food. It also has to be who actually has a property that they own where they could grow trees, right? And plants. But it's also the time that we have available to us and the ideas that we have about certain kinds of work, certain kinds of labor, and whether or not we are too good to do it. And so I'm wondering if you thought about all of these different layers and all of the systems and the offices that have to connect to really address this issue. Because again, it's not just a Ministry of Health
No, it's not.
thing.
No, I think you put the nail on the head. And when I was writing the presentation, I wanted to be careful to sort of think about that because, like you say, if someone's working two jobs. They're not going to go and grow food or, they don't, the people are trapped in situations where they don't have the financial ability to go to Solomon's and buy radicchio, or whatever. And so I get it all the time when you're talking about like plant-based diet in particular. People will say, "Wait, that's an expensive thing. It's seen as an elite thing." Um, but I think that's why it has to be a systemic. I think you've touched on that. It has to be a systemic change that happens. We have to release people from the grip of these situations. And again, thinking as a systems person, even if you're not thinking as a humanitarian, if you're thinking about it as a systems engineering thing, you need a population that is able to contribute to the development of the country. And so they need to be healthy. So even just thinking about it, even as an economist or something like that, as from a health economy perspective, there has to be action. I think we're not that organized yet because coming from a post-colonial setting, there's so much, it's so heavy, everything. There's so much in there that has to be rearranged. There's corruption. There's, special interests. Because who is rubber stamping another fast food restaurant when there's all these diabetic amputees all around? It doesn't make sense. There's so much that's irrational about what we see. And so I think that we need a revolution, basically. And when I say revolution, I'm not meaning, bombs and explosions and so on, because I'm too old for that. But I think there has to be a real change in how we provide access to people for food. And it goes to even like the humanness of people and, making sure that people have the environment that is needed to support their health so that them and their children can build the society, the country, the society that we need, which is a rational way of thinking, I think. When you start rationally thinking about self-interest, you can't be self-interested unless your society is running. Your gate could only go up so high. So At some point you have to really look at the situation that you're in, the environment that you're in, and all like for example in Scandinavia they realize this, that they have to put some resources into ensuring that people have the bare minimum of health and happiness. And at the end of the day, that makes for a better society. So you're right, it's not just a Ministry of Health thing, it is a revolution that we need. And they call me a radical, but that's what we need, I don't know how we get around it. You can't tiptoe around this. We're not gonna build hospitals to enough, we don't have enough hospitals, enough money to build enough hospitals for the sickness that is out here. We need to reframe the sickness. It's not a natural state of being. The natural state of human being is actually to be healthful. So I think going back to that would be good. But it's a big issue. So I definitely take the point.
Yeah, I think too that we've accepted a lot of the health issues that we see as normal. Like, oh yeah, people just have diabetes. Like that's just the thing the Bahamians have. And yeah, high blood pressure. Everybody have high blood pressure. You get to a certain age, you just get it. Uh, so I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the high rates that we see of these particular diseases and conditions, and how it is related to what you were talking about with epigenetics.
Yeah, so exactly. People are, it's becoming too normal for people to have, I mean, especially I notice a lot of people becoming amputated for diabetes, as a result of diabetes. And, people are, it's become so acceptable, even obesity. Obesity is chronic in the Bahamas, and it's even fetishized to some extent. Um, so the normalization of sickness. I don't know how it came about. I don't know when it came about, but that's definitely a big part of what has to be addressed. We need a social engineering situation. We need to, approach again from a systems. I'm thinking as a systems person with this, like a systems thinker. We need a social engineering project when it comes to health. I'm not talking about necessarily controlling people, but I'm talking about giving people the tools and going back to the theme of my talk, which was self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is something that can be, it can't be doled out like an aspirin, like a pill, but it can be theorized, it can be examined, it can be evidence-based, and it's a tool that you can actually give to people. And you can, with that tool, they will actually be able to address their own health. So speaking about it from as a biomedical scientist, so again, I'm a lab person, right? So what I would like to do is do, like, for example, a clinical trial where we look at self-efficacy and an epigenetic state. So this would be, for example, you take a segment of the community and you offer them the tools of self-efficacy as mapped out by Bandura and others over the years, and you give them healthful foods. You assist them with preparing the foods with recipes and so on and so forth, and then you measure epigenetic states and health outcomes in the lab setting based on that intervention. So I think that we have to have a much more active, evidence-based approach to social engineering towards greater health in the community. I hope that answered it. Sorry.
Yeah, I see we have a question in the chat. Social engineering is already done under capitalism to make most people have poor diets. So wouldn't it be quite an uphill battle to try social engineering to amend this?
That's a great question. Thank you for the question. Um, again, speaking from my own empirical experiments on myself, because also this is about my personal journey in terms of health. What I would say is that the things that we think are craveable, it's trickery. This is not real. This is trickery of the brain. So, for example, you might think, like going back to the sugar example, I used to eat a lot of sugar. You know, you think, oh, donuts, that just sounds amazing. But as you start to become more rational, and rationalism has to do with, again, programming yourself, especially your gut microbiome, so that it's not causing you to do irrational stuff and eat irrational things. You actually, you don't need social engineering, to be honest, because now you are thinking rationally. The body doesn't even want sugar. So really my call is, with social engineering, is to reinstill rationalism and humanity in how we are approaching diet and exercise. So it may be an uphill battle, but in a sense, it's a return to our original selves. We've become, colonized by the exact same thing. Sugar, going back to sugar, sugar is the devil to me. So I keep talking about sugar, but sugar is what brought our ancestors here. They brought Africans over to the Caribbean in order to farm sugarcane to make sugar for tea in the UK. So in English, there's English ladies drinking tea, and meanwhile, with the sugared tea, and meanwhile, our ancestors were getting killed and having their backs broken for sugar. And how ironic that now this exact same substance is the thing that is, contributing to diabetes and obesity, and the thing that is now killing us in the new world where our ancestors were brought. So I say all that to say, sorry if I going on a little long, but I say all that to say that the social engineering that I'm speaking about is really a return to the state before all of this industrialization and slavery sort of manipulated both our brain and our gut to be aberrant and almost self-defeating. Actually, yes, self-defeating. It's like something that's been put in us that is killing us in an incendiary way. So I don't think that it's up. It may be uphill. It will be uphill, but I don't see any way out of it other than that, to reinstill rationalism.
Yeah, there's a lot being said about sugar in particular, from different places and in different contexts, but generally the consensus sugar is bad. Like, get it out of your life. Um, and I know of people who have cut sugar, particularly the processed ones, and that it is not fun. And someone is asking in the chat for tips on how to cut sugar from our diets.
Okay, so I think for me, again, this is very personal to me, and what the things that I use, the tips that I use to get rid of it, because I was a big sugar head, so to speak. I was a big consumer of sugar. And for me, before that, I actually used to smoke tobacco. That's another one that's very addictive. And you have to take executive control over your body, I think. For me personally, again, this is not this is not necessarily a prescription, but for me, you have to take control of your mind and your body. And I use rationalism as my kind of guiding star. So there's something irrational about my brain telling me I need a cigarette when it's killing me. Something isn't right there. Although it's strong, but at some point I have to find a fight back in my brain, in my executive level, to say no, that I'm not going to have a cigarette or sugar or whatever. And for me, again, it's rationalism. When it comes to a cigarette, I have a part of the way I quit tobacco was I had to grow a part of my thinking. That was everything. Every time I had a craving for a cigarette, I had to say, you could destroy your lungs, you're gonna die. This is gonna kill you. And I don't know if that works for everybody, but it worked for me, as a sort of a voice against the craving. And with sugar, I just had this epiphany one day that this is totally irrational. I am eating a whole, like, if a donut, you could basically, if you could take the sugar out of the donut, it would be a few tablespoons of sugar. And there's something very irrational about eating that much sugar. Sugar is not actually inherently bad, but the amounts that we eat, especially processed sugar, is irrational, and it's a feature of the dehumanization that, like I spoke to, started with slavery and now is continuing with our present day overkill of sugar and everything. So it's not necessarily an inherently bad thing, but too much of it is irrational. So just that thought of like, this is irrational. This is going to this is impacting my life in a way that is not good, and I love my life. So I want to. I prefer a life to a donut. You know. So that was kind of my epiphany, and I think in all things, the way I've come to uh, initiate change in my life in general is to use rationalism as that guiding star of what I should be doing. And I think it goes back again to reclaiming humanism away from this colonialism and this capitalism, and really having an internal voice that you can groom to be actually to the advantage of your own organismal form, so your own biology, that we inhabit as an executive self. So that's why I think self-efficacy is such an important tool in that toolbox.
As you were talking, I was thinking about where cravings come from. Are they coming from your stomach or your brain?
Yep, yep. I think both, really, to be honest. Because with the tobacco, I mean, it's crazy. Why would you crave something that's killing you? It's a toxin. You can use nicotine to kill people. It's a very good way to murder somebody. Just give them some nicotine and in some tea. Um, and yet your brain is saying, go get a cigarette, you know? Go to the shop and get a cigarette. It'll be okay, just one more. So it's coming from somewhere that is not of your best interests. And I mean, you could speak from like a spiritual, religious perspective. Um, that it's basically it's almost like a spiritual attack, but but as a biologist, I would say it's obviously it's a biological attack by these external forces of capitalism and colonialism that are sneaking into your brain and sneaking into your stomach. And I see Erin Green on the call, so she made an important point at the Future of Democracy Conference. It's biological warfare. So our bodies are literally the battleground for this biological warfare that's happening, where they're saying they're making you do drugs, making you drink, and putting us in a condition where we are killing ourselves. They don't even need to actually come in and wield the whip or the gun, because now we wield it for ourselves. We kill ourselves and each other. So the revolution has to have something to do with rationalism, and it has to have something to do with returning to a self and a voice in both the gut and the brain that is in line and in tune with the overall well-being of the body. If those two are incongruent, then something is very wrong, So
Yeah, this is a lot of mental work you're talking about. We have to do a lot of stuff up here first.
Yep, yep. I think that's where the mindfulness and the meditation really comes in as well. You know, just even putting something as small as putting meditation in the schools, in the workplace. The studies have shown that this reduces interpersonal violence. It reduces depression and many other mental issues. And I think that quiet time of, again, speaking with either, on a spiritual level, a higher being, or with your own self is a big part of finding the tools and the language to regain control over the body, which has been taken away from us.
I have a question on that regaining control, but let's go to Dylan's question first.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's about sugar again. It's a simple question. Is honey a good substitute for sugar? Like the manufactured kind of sugar?
Yeah, honey is a good alternative because it's a whole food. Another good alternative I found is dates. So I am I make like ice cream with dates, for example, vegan ice cream with dates. Another good thing I found is raisins. There's also coconut sugar. So these are all whole foods. But what I've also found, I have to say, is that the longer I've done without sugar, the less I even crave those sugars because you don't really want too much of any kind of sugar, even like a whole food sugar. You don't want too much. Honey, all of this should be in balance. Um, so it's interesting how when you change your diet, it actually changes your cravings. And I've definitely found a decrease even in my craving for like dates because I couldn't survive without it at first. I had raisins and nuts and raisins in my car, in my office, just in case I had a craving, like a real crackhead. Um, but now I find that I don't need these things because I you know, I have a better, I think my gut has a better and a more, again, rational um, needs. The gut microbiome that I have has more rational needs. But I think, these things are very good um, in between things to bridge the gap between hardcore processed sugar and, and not having any sugar. So I would definitely endorse any whole food is good, especially eating a lot of fruits is good because although you don't want too much fructose, because fructose can actually uh, impact in a negative way on fatty liver disease. But the thing about fruit is that it's a whole food, so you're getting fiber, you're getting polyphenols, you're getting vitamins, and so on and so forth. So all of these things sort of counteract the fructose or the glucose in the fruit. Whereas when you're eating a donut, the donut is flour, sugar, and food coloring. So there's nothing good in there at all. It's just a hit of sugar and the gut microbiome, the bad bacteria in there are just like, yes, we got her again, to feed ourselves. Then they just multiply and then that I'm fat. So yeah, so I think just having that sort of perspective is really good in terms of quitting sugar.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do other folks have questions, things you're thinking about that you want to share in can use the chat or raise your hand. Maybe while people are thinking, I'll ask another one of my questions, which is about knowledge that we have or that we have had. This came up, I think, in the session that we had with Nyambi about memory. The way that we can throw away knowledge because something new is provided, right? So I'm thinking about what you were saying about this reliance on pills for everything. And we know that our Grammy and great grandmother lived long, 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 had good lives, and they were, boiling as their sea or whatever. Um, and I don't even know what my question is around this, but I guess there are some things that you require that sort of manufactured stuff, right? The pill, the capsule. But I don't hear a lot of people talking about the plant-based medicines or even acknowledging them as medicines. And sometimes they get conflated with, I don't know, like old wives' tales or something. How do you see the official systems, um, I guess, supporting this shift? Or maybe what might be possible, right, through official channels to bring us back to um, that good old, the lemon and honey and the stuff that's growing in your backyard and, I don't know, wearing socks on the cold towel, all these things.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a great question because that's pretty much, to be honest, to be totally candid, that's where I find myself as as a biomedical scientist, sort of the direction I'm going in because I've been in labs, like I said, I've worked on treatments, I've worked on diagnosis of disease. But the truth is that in my own life, um, I'm not practicing that. I'm very healthy. I'm not using any pharmacological interventions in my personal life. I would if I had to, but because I've been a vegan for about 10 years, I found that to be very helpful for me. So I haven't needed any pharmacological interventions. So as a biomedical scientist, I'm kind of a little bit in internal conflict, I would say, because I work in the biomedical field. I work in medicine, which is all about pills and hospitals, and I diagnose this disease, and then um, then you get your pills and so on, and that's what I do, but that's not really how I'm thinking. So I think where I am going right now, that's why I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this and to speak about this because this is how I'm able to sort of shape my ideas is through discussions like this, through feedback and people throwing out ideas as well. This really helps me to build my thoughts. And what I'm interested in now is trying to find through my consultancy, my startup consultancy and research firm. Um, I'm interested in trying to systematize and formalize some of what the science is saying, because although it is an ancient belief that food is medicine, going all the way back to thousands of years ago at Imhotep, um, because of capitalism, there has never been a formalization. Recently there's been like clinical trials looking at plant-based diet versus controlled diet, which would be like a normal meat-based diet, and the impact on health. But I saw, for example, there was a video on TikTok by a nurse on one of the islands. I can't remember which island. I think it was Auckland's or something. And he was a male nurse, and he was saying about people coming to him after they saying, "We didn't come to you until now because we were drinking our bush," right? And he was saying, "Well, how do you know how much bush to take, when to take it? Um, what concentration, and so on." So as a biomedical scientist, going back to that, I think my interest now is becoming, because of my own experiences and my own beliefs, frankly, and the science, based on my beliefs, based on the science, that we have to systematize these approaches. Even talking about self-efficacy, that has to be systematized, it has to be evidence-based. Talking about plant-based interventions, there has to be a better understanding of which plants, for whom, and so on, because there are polyphenols in these plants and they have different purposes. Some have cancer preventative properties, some are antioxidant, and so on and so forth. So they call it personalized nutrigenomics. That's the field that's now coming out, where you can have personalized nutrition that will aid with whatever disease you have or are susceptible to, based on your genome and your epigenome. So just to round up all of that, I think what needs to happen is, and it has to come from us as indigenous slash African slash post-colonial people who are not in the rat race of capitalism, making money off of pharmacological interventions. It's a freeing thing to actually be able to just look at the science and to devise interventions, real interventions based on the science, not based on bottom lines. And maybe as we get into it, the funding and money becomes a thing, but there has to be clarity about what we have to look at it as a medicine, and it has to be studied as a medicine and implemented as a medicine. And I think not just at the local level or the individual level, but at the systemic and the public health level. So that's something that I'm definitely very interested in pursuing, just based on the science and based on, just so that I don't continue to be a complete hypocrite in terms of participating in one aspect of biomedicine while believing in another.
It would be also interesting to look at this knowledge, this generational knowledge could create industry, because we know that there are things that we've been knowing from time, right? And then all of a sudden, everything was soursop, right? Soursop is just being like integrated into all kinds of products when the world caught on that this was good for this and that and the next thing. And you see it happening with different plants. Neem, now the big thing is moringa. And before we capitalize on our own knowledge, somebody else comes in and hears about it and does their big one. And then we have to start buying the powder and the this and the that for various reasons, including climate change and, our own trees and plants being wiped out, which leads me to the question of the environmental factors that you talked about and the ways that climate and climate change, in particular climate disaster, is impacting our health. Is this something that you have looked at in your research?
To be honest, not specifically, but it's something I definitely it's very integral to our existence. So, and it's also funded, to be honest. So it's something that globally you can actually get funding to do. So if you have a topic, whether it be viruses or diabetes, whatever it is, if you can relate it to climate change, then there's some funding there for that, just from a practical level. So that's one reason why I'm interested in it. But of course, also because it's our reality. I mean, it's just crazy what's happening with the climate in the Bahamas and the region in general. And it's actually a part of, again, this whole colonization that we're experiencing, this condition of colonialism, where we find ourselves in this setting. We just reached a couple centuries ago in terms of our bloodline, our ancestry. And now we look like we might have to be climate refugees again, if we don't do something immediate about what's happening with the flooding and the hurricanes and so on. I believe personally that it's within our capacity intellectually and resource-wise to combat climate change and to continue to, to exist in these lands, to build the type of society that, a new type of society even for planet Earth that can actually resist these kind of threats, really a resilient space. And of course, to paraphrase Just, who was the father of epigenetics, the kind of forgotten father of epigenetics. He was an African American who was kind of never given his due, but he used to work on sea urchin eggs, and he didn't believe that genetics had really much impact at all. He didn't believe in DNA being, very important at all, and he ended up being incorrect about that. But what he was correct about was the fact that these other things are important, and which led to the field of epigenetics. But his quote was that, to paraphrase, sorry, but it's basically that we are in congruence with our environment. We are one and the same with the environment. And that's why what makes me or any other person is not just the genes, but the environment, because those two things are, they're congruent. They're all the same thing at a certain scale. If you go up if you go up into space and look down at Earth, you're not going to see me. You're going to see a humanity. You're not going to see a human being. You see humanity, and you see, the Earth, the environment itself. So we are this climate change is very much integral to our health. It's not just something external to us. It's getting in us now. It's even looking at Jamaica, they have leptospirosis after that hurricane. And that's an infectious disease, but people are dying from leptospirosis. They have an outbreak. So, all of this is a part, these microorganisms that are taking advantage of these conditions. All of this is a part of our health, our integral health. So I don't think that we can really parse it from our well-being. The earth is sick, the country is sick, the climate is sick, and we are sick, in on the ground. And all of it has to do with, frankly, problems that humans created through greed and again through capitalism and colonialism. So yeah, I definitely see it as a part of the need to increase our health, and I'll definitely be interested in looking more at that, especially looking at epigenetics.
And I think it would be interesting to see, particularly as we see the increased frequency and intensity of climate disaster happening in the region. And I wonder too if anyone is doing this work in other parts of the world, like in Palestine, where this constant bombing and everything that's poisoning the land and compromising the quality of the air, all of this, plus the trauma that the people themselves are experiencing. What is the next generation of Palestinian people's health going to look like as a consequence of this genocide that's being enacted against them? I wonder if anybody is looking into doing that work. But while we're here, Free Palestine, last week was Read Palestine Week. If you missed out, go to publishersforpalestine.org to see a list of books and authors that you can read. There were some books that were available free of charge during the week, but the week is over. And if you want to learn more about Palestine, you want to know what books to read, get in touch with me, send an email to Equality Bahamas, and we can definitely send you some resources. But we'll have more to say on that pretty soon. We have some things in the works, let's say that.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you spoke about trauma. I think trauma is a very important aspect of this as well, because, for example, in the Holocaust, it was found that there was a multi-generational impact So pregnant women who were pregnant, women who were pregnant during the time of the Holocaust, not just their children, but their grandchildren actually have a higher risk of PTSD. So they tend to have less resilient, they're more susceptible to stress and so on. So yes, when you look at Palestine, I mean, it's terrible. It's going to be not just one generation that's impacted. It's possibly two, three, or more generations down the road who are going to be impacted by that. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about this before one-on-one, but I do think when we talk about epigenetics, we talk about trauma. I think about breast cancer and the prevalence here in the Bahamas, which is the highest in the world. At the last piece of research that I saw was the highest in the world. Um, and people here are diagnosed younger, 20 years younger than in the US, and in later stages, typically in stage 3 or 4. And many people have one of the BRCA gene mutations. I can't remember if it was 6 or 7 that were found here in the Bahamas. And for a lot of people who have it sort of in their families, carry some BRCA gene mutation. And I don't think that that's been tied to anything. People are like, what is it? Is it the water? Is it, what something that isn't necessarily environmental in that way, but is passed on generationally? Could it be the result of a trauma?
Uh, The BRCA story, that's such a great question because the BRCA story is extremely fascinating. First of all, like you said, we have 7 BRCA mutations. Why do we have and these mutations are highly prevalent. We have the most prevalent BRCA mutations in the world. Second to us is the Ashkenazi Jews. And the Ashkenazi Jews they have a much lesser prevalence. So we have this extraordinary prevalence. I think it was in a cohort of women with breast cancer, if I recall correctly, it was 21% or something like that. Like about 20% of those women had the BRCA mutation, which is a lot, right? But a question that I have is, so that's a lot, but there's also another 80% plus who don't have the BRCA mutation, who are getting breast cancer. So that speaks to probably the environmental, something in the environment. And again, just to quote, someone has said previously that genes are the bullet and the environment is the trigger, right? So you could have a bullet, but if you don't pull the trigger, no one can get shoot. So with the people who have the BRCA mutation, and it's not just breast cancer that it impacts, it also impacts prostate cancer, which is something that is, again, also highly prevalent in our setting. So the thing with the BRCA mutation is it predisposes you to developing these cancers, right? But you still need that trigger. You still need that environmental trigger. And there are a number of theories about what that environmental trigger might be. It could be hormone disrupting chemicals in the environment because frankly, we are not looking in the water, we're not looking in our environment to see what is actually there that might be potentially co-interacting with BRCA mutations and other mutations of this type. It could be the trauma, it could be the food, it could be the stress of everyday life in the Bahamas. In terms of the other part of this is why do we have so many people with the mutation? And from a genetic perspective, it's interesting. They say that the theory is that because we have these islands, so Eleuthera has a lot of BRCA mutant people with BRCA mutations. The theory is that it's because of this thing called genetic bottlenecking, which happens on an island. So on an island, what matters most is who happens to come. So if the person who happens to come has a BRCA mutation and they stay on the island and they interbreed and with other persons, then the likelihood is that you will have a high concentration of BRCA on that island because there's less gene flow, given that it's an island. To me, that's an insufficient argument, because if that were the case, we would have one BRCA mutation that was prevalent in the Bahamas because of bottlenecking. Why do we have 7? That means 7 different mutations have come in and become genetically bottlenecked. One theory that is provocative and I find very interesting is that there is some sort of advantage to the BRCA mutation, for example, during slavery, that there was some advantage to it that becomes disadvantageous and pathological, but that during slavery there was something about these BRCA mutations that caused for them to be retained. But I think it's a mystery. It's something that they have a conference every year in Eleuthera talking about breast cancer, and there's some really interesting. I went to one a few years back, and there was some really interesting discussions from people from University of Maryland and some local scientists about what is the source of all this BRCA mutation in our environment. And again, that is an interesting question to me, as well as why does it pool so much in the breast cancer cohort? What is the environmental feature of this disease that is causing for the other 80% who don't have the BRCA mutation, that's co-interacting with the people with the BRCA mutation, and causing for them to have breast cancer at such an early age and so at such a high rate of progression, as you pointed out. So I think that's a very important area for research for any Bahamian scientist. So we're actually getting into that at the National Reference Lab as well to look more closely at this.
All right. Given the last opportunity for folks to think about questions or ideas that you want to share with us, and to give you some thinking time, Dr. Martin, can you tell us about what the National Reference Lab is and what kind of things you're doing there on a daily basis?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about my baby, basically. So the National Reference Lab we are actually just about to move to our new location. We got an IDB loan for $2 million. So we have a nice new kitted out lab in Oaksfield, just nearby the Michael Eldon building across from UB. And what we do is we began as an HIV reference lab. So we are the child of pandemics, beginning with the HIV pandemic beginning in the 1980s. But the National Reference Lab came into being in about 2001. I think it was maybe the late 90s to early 2000s in response to the HIV pandemic. So HIV requires for its management a great deal of laboratory testing. We need to look at how much virus is in the blood. We have to look at the immune status of the patient and so on, which is a bit of a departure from your other standard lab tests. And so this is why the reference lab, what was then the reference lab, came into being back in the late 90s. Now, since then, we have had various waves of outbreaks, beginning with arbovirus outbreaks. We had dengue, Zika, chikungunya over the years. And as a result of that, we were able to use the instrumentation that we built for HIV management. We were able to use that and our expertise to address these emerging diseases. Then in 2020, there was the COVID pandemic, which was a terrible, horrible event. But when the COVID pandemic came, the National Reference Lab was the only lab in the country that had the molecular equipment to actually do the testing for COVID. So from the COVID pandemic, we actually, well, when the COVID pandemic hit, first of all, we were receiving samples from all over the country, all the hospitals, all the clinics. It was extremely rough. But from that, we were able to build more capacities. We got some donations of genetic sequencing equipment. And so we've been using that now to be able to sequence the genomes of the viruses that are passing through the Bahamas, in particular COVID, but also influenzas. Um, you have RSV, other respiratory viruses. We also test for like monkeypox, dengue, chicken, arboviruses, and about to get into bacteria as well. So that's the exciting thing, going back to my genetic roots now. I thought I had left genetics and I was firmly in molecular biology, but we are now getting very much into looking at the genetics of microorganisms in our environment. And going forward, what we want to do is we basically want to address all of the diseases in the Bahamas of public health significance that are not being addressed. A lot of things go undetected, or not even undetected, but not even unlooked for, if you like. No one's even looking for these things. We need to be looking at what's in our water, what's in our environment, and doing research to look at what is really impacting the health of our community. So as we move to our new building, and as we build our capacities in kind of these more advanced types of testing, such as genetic sequencing, what we really aim to do is to speak to, and to not just speak to, but also provide actionable epidemiological intelligence that will allow for public health officials and the government in general to better address the health of the people. And this includes chronic disease as well. We're getting into, as I said, cancer in particular, but other types of chronic disease are very much on our radar in terms of applying our molecular skill set, molecular and genetic skill set to these diseases.
Really interesting. So you wouldn't be engaging directly with patients. You would be engaging with other like medical institutions that would be sending samples to you.
Yeah, exactly. We currently we do rapid HIV testing on site at our current location. But as we move to our new location, it's going to be solely as a reference slash research facility. So we're not seeing patients directly. We're we're doing the tests that kind of no one else does. So there's a lot of standard lab tests that are done, in hospitals, for example. You can do your chemistries, you can do your hematology and so on there. But you can even, let's say you can even get an initial diagnosis for HIV. But what we do at the reference lab is we can then tell you what strain of HIV you have. We can tell you what your viral load is. That means how much virus is in your blood. We could tell you how your immune system is doing. And then we can also tell you at a population level, or we're aiming to tell you at a population level, how much drug-resistant virus do you have? How much of this strain do you have at the population level? So we're moving to becoming a more of a public health lab rather than a patient-centered kind of lab.
Okay, well, how can we keep up with what you are doing, what you're researching? Will you be publishing your findings? I know there are lots of diseases and conditions that people are very curious about and that we've been hearing more about lately. Like I know in the last few years, I've heard so much about Alzheimer's and dementia. It seems like, I don't know if it's an increase or if people are just a little bit more willing to talk about it. And people are sort of coming up with theories, right? Like how sh like sugar is related to dementia and these kinds of things. Can we look forward to you delving into some of this and seeing why there might be increased reporting or increased conversation about some of these conditions?
Yeah, definitely. It would be great to get into Alzheimer's and some of the also, like, even community violence is a personal, something I'm personally interested in, and the connection with that to epigenetics. So currently, what we have published on is we've published, well, right now I'll say not what we have published on, but the most recent publication was last year, where one of my pet things is using saliva as a diagnostic sample instead of blood, because going back to, I'm a self-efficacy kind of person, so I really believe in empowering people to to manage their own health. And there's like this long history in medicine of, frankly, a lack of regard for the personhood of the subject, of the person who's being studied or who is being administered treatment. And so nobody ever asked, you know, well, I mean, now they're asking, but back in the day, there was never a question of, do you want me to, is it okay to take your blood? It was just understood. We're going to take your blood. There was no investigation of whether there were better samples or whether people would prefer other types of samples. So saliva is something that I'm really interested in as a potential sample type, especially in our archipelagic setting, because I don't know if you know, but we have a real issue with getting samples to Nassau from the family islands, because the blood samples, they don't keep. You have to, well, number one, they don't keep. If you don't get it to us in a day, or two, it's really no good for our tests. Number two, a lot of the airlines, they don't want to carry blood. So it has to go on the boat. And on the boat, it takes more than a day or two. So this is a big gap for ensuring equity of health across the archipelago, which is one of the promises of the Bahamas as an archipelago, always has been. I don't know if it's been directly articulated, but it's understood that we expect for a minimum level of equity across the family islands in terms of health, in terms of access to diagnostics, and access to care, but it's not so. And so with regard to saliva, we did a study a few years back on HIV oral testing. And the most recent study we published was using saliva for COVID sampling, because I don't know if you remember, we had a Minister of Health who had to resign based on the fact that he allowed people in with swabs. We had a crisis of swabs during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We couldn't get swabs because Trump shut off all access of all export of the swabs. He said, we're keeping that for ourselves in the United States. And, we couldn't get swabs. And it's a cheap little thing. You would think it should be easy to get, but that's what blocked our testing at the beginning of the pandemic. Come to find out now, saliva is as good, in some cases, with some strains of COVID, a better sample than these swabs. So going back to self-efficacy again, if God forbid there is another pandemic, we have bird flu looming in the background. So something we're watching and monitoring very closely. We're testing all our samples for bird flu right now to make sure it's not in the country. But God forbid, bird flu comes into being. We need to be, hopefully this time, thinking more about how we can be more self-efficacious as a country, whether it be with saliva. Saliva is good for COVID. I'm not sure if it's good for bird flu. We haven't done that study. But whatever it is, we have to ensure that we are thinking about efficacy, being self-efficacious with our pandemic response, because there's no way that we can find ourselves caught short because we didn't have swabs again. So that's one area that I'm currently looking at. And also, what else are we into right now? We're looking at, like I said, the genetic sequencing is another big aspect of our research right now. Speaking again about the archipelagic setting, we have a unique situation. I talked about genetic bottlenecking with the BRCA mutation, but likewise with viruses, because of our archipelagic geography, we end up with a lot of genetic bottlenecking. For example, with the alpha variant of COVID, we found it in Nassau at one time point, and it wasn't in Freeport. So it's this unique situation where, because of the water between our islands, gene flow of these viruses is not as readily it doesn't flow as readily as if we were Jamaica or Barbados, because there's no way to stop a virus going from one end of Barbados to the next. But there is a way that we can maybe stop a virus from going from Freeport to New Providence if we can detect it rapidly enough and shut down the movement from that island. Don't kill me for it. I'm not saying to lock down nowhere, but I'm just saying, in theory, we can actually do this, and it's because of this. It actually goes back to the theory of entropy, information entropy, which is about how information, because viruses are really just a bit of information moving from place to place, from host to host. So how can we use our information, which is the genetic sequence data, to sort of combat the flow of the virus information from island to island? That's another area of research that we're looking at. So very sort of virus focused right now. However, we have the technology to ensure that we can serve our people in these other ways that are probably a bit more impactful, actually, because what we're dying of is not really the flu. We are dying of the flu, but the thing that we're really dying of a lot is we are dying of cardiac issues. We're dying of diabetes, hypertension, and other cancers and chronic disease. So as we started in HIV, we now intend to shift to the virus of what I would call the virus of capitalism, which is and white supremacy, which has resulted in these diseases of public health significance, in particular the chronic non-communicable diseases.
All very interesting. I'm curious to see how that work will connect with some of the other work that's going on with NGOs and movements like the reparations movement, right? When we talk about the causation, capitalism, colonialism, the transatlantic trade and enslaved persons and how that's impacted our health. And how do you repair that? How do we seek repair for that? It'll be interesting to see if there's any movement towards sort of ancestry, because people are getting very interested in that now. Tracing not just back to islands, but trying to figure out, where do we really come from? Where'd these boats come from? But yeah, we're down to our last few minutes. So I guess my question for you, I really want to know where you see a need, like how can we, if you could direct students who are very interested in biology, biomedical science, trying to get into the field, are there specific areas that we really need expertise that students can consider? And my other final question is just simple steps, simple next steps that you can offer to people who join this conversation, who watch the recording later and think, yes, I do need to take my health into my own hands. And I just need a couple things that are, the bar is not on the floor, but not too high. I can actually clear it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think in terms of, I always get this question from students about what would be a good field to get into. This might just be a bias based on what I'm into right now, because I'm very much into the genetic sequencing, but bioinformatics in the region, bioinformaticians, data analysts, these kind of skill sets are really lacking. If you're a bioinformatician and a really good one, you could make quite a healthy living in this region, because we are generating genetic sequences. You talked about the ancestry aspect. So we are either we're generating the genetic sequences and we don't have the capacity to really analyze them to the extent that we should. Although we're trying to get a lot better at that at the National Reference Lab. Either it's that, or we don't have we're not in control of our ancestry DNA data. And this to me is a really big problem. If you understand the power of DNA sequence data, you would want to really hold control of it, especially from a reparations perspective. We can't allow for genetic sequence data to go the same route as some of the other resources where Dr. Walter Rodney talks a lot about this, about how we will mine the raw material. So for example, in Ghana, they will pick the cocoa, right? And then they send the cocoa to Switzerland, and Switzerland makes chocolate, but it's the chocolate that makes the money, because when they sell that chocolate, it's very expensive, but they're paying, pennies on the dollar for the cocoa. The same people who pick the cocoa in Ghana can't afford the chocolate that results from their labor. So we don't want genetic sequence data. It's a critical moment right now where we have to work very hard to ensure that we play catch up and we don't become like the Ghanaian cocoa farmers. We want to be like the Swiss. We want to be making our own chocolate, So that's one thing we're very particular about it, say at the lab. And I think it's in general in our sort of setting, in our kind of setting, it's important to maintain control of our genetic sequence data. And a big part of that, just like how in Switzerland they have chocolate manufacturing plants, we need more skills in terms of analyzing the data and making it information that can be used for our betterment rather than sending it away, having it stored in repositories in the global north, and then we're still in the same condition as we always were. So I'd say that bioinformaticians, data analysts is a big area. The world is also going molecular. All of laboratory science is going molecular. So I think anything in the molecular field or the sort of genetic field is going to be useful. Again, this might be just my bias. And to your other question, you were asking about steps that people can take to improve their health. I think it begins with a conversation with the self. And again, the self is what we call the self is an executive of the body that we think we own, but we don't really, because again, we have a lot of microorganisms and a lot of processes happening in our bodies that are not under our control. But I think there's a lot that we can do that is under our control that maybe we aren't taking control of. So that first conversation with the self, which I think can begin with meditation, with sort of bringing mindfulness into the space of the self and of the mind. That can be the first step. And then the second step from there is once you have set an intention, setting an intention is such a big thing. Again, writing it down, even if you don't look at it again, just writing it down can actually help you to move in the right direction. And like Paulo Coelho says, just if you can just turn your face to the sun sometimes and walk towards the sun, then you've already done a great deal. And then you should pat yourself on the back because once you take that step, you're taking one step, and then that's building self-efficacy. So the next step after that, you say, okay, maybe I will, this morning, I will do some yoga. Maybe I'll walk around the block. Maybe I'll have a meatless Monday or whatever. So start with a small step because I think that many things die by trying to do too much all at once. At least again, from my personal experience, if I try and do too much at once and it's sort of something I don't want to do, if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it. So I think the point is not to force yourself to be motivated to do stuff that's like, it tastes bad and this healthy food tastes bad and I don't really want to run, and that kind of thing. If you really have that mindset, then it's not going to last. The key, I think, is not to try and fight yourself, but to actually create a self that is rational enough to realize that you're supposed to be moving, you're supposed to be mobile, you're supposed to be eating plants. These are rational deeds of a rational mind. So the biggest thing I think to do is to not try and be something that you're not. You have to try and become something that is conducive to health. And that begins with, again, just that conversation. And from there, you will find that it becomes a lot easier day to day because you're moving towards a state that is actually better, that is actually happier and more healthy and more conducive to your well-being. So that would be my advice from my journey trying to age with some grace.
Thank you for those. Yeah, those don't seem so hard. I think we try to just go so hard at everything all the time. We kind of set ourselves up to be miserable and just struggling every day. So, it's December. Doesn't mean you need to go out and get a gym membership, right? Like the weather is actually a little cooler. Hopefully it'll get even cooler to make walks feel more possible, less like punishment. Like those little things can make a difference. Parking a little further from the door than you usually do, right? A little something, something. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing. Making small changes that kind of add up to something else, and we start to understand ourselves in a different way and our capabilities in a different way. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us. I think you've given us lots to think about. Some of us might be going to a search engine to look up some of these terms and see if we could find out a little bit more. But really great kind of practical tips for us and ways to think about the Bahamas that we have now and the one that we can actually build if we look to systems and see ourselves as being able to change systems, to, advocate for the people who are in positions of power, to make the changes that we need to support us in improving our overall health. So thank you so much, Dr. Indira Martin, for being with us.
So much for having me. I really appreciate it.
This was great. We were looking forward to it for a very long time. And I'm sure we'll be calling on you again. Thanks to the folks that joined us on Zoom and watched on Facebook. Most of you were very quiet, but if you have thoughts, questions, send them through equalitybahamas@gmail.com and we can pass them on. I just volunteered you to answer people's questions by email. Did not check first. So we are almost at the end of the Global 16 Days campaign. We have one more day, which is tomorrow, Wednesday, December 10th, and it is Human Rights Day. So no better day to be in conversation with human rights expert Gaynell Curry, who has worked at the United Nations in both New York and Geneva and been placed in various places, including Sudan, is now at the Faculty of Law at University of the Bahamas, which is very lucky to have her. She could be anywhere, and she chose to come back home. She is also an independent expert member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. And she will be talking to us about reclaiming a culture of human rights. We know that there's a way that we think about human rights as foreign to the Bahamas or some imposition by some other body. But we know from Gaynell Curry, we know from Marion Bethel, that they have actually experienced Bahamians leveraging human rights mechanisms to access, to expand human rights, including the right to vote for women, right? The Bahamian women's suffrage movement used international human rights mechanisms, and they were used in all kinds of other ways. So we need to reclaim it. We need to take it back and understand it as our right, to recognize human rights and to demand that we have full access to all of our rights, because none of our rights are fully enjoyable unless we have them all. So join us for that conversation. That will be in person at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas on West Hill Street. That is Wednesday, December 10th at 6 p.m. and you can register for that on our Luma page. It's lu.ma/16 days 25. If you've missed previous sessions, that is very sad, but not as sad as it could be because we recorded most of them. So look for the recordings. They'll be up by the end of this week on our YouTube channel at Equality 242. And just a quick note, when you see our posts on social media, even if you don't see them, please visit our social media pages maybe once a week, especially Facebook, because we are being actively shadow banned. Our posts are not getting reach, and we're actually not even allowed to boost our posts to do ads anymore. So we really need you to go to the page, like things to teach the algorithm that you want to see more of us, and share our content as much as possible. We really appreciate that, boosting the signal so we can reach more people with the good news that we all deserve human rights. Thanks everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your night and have a great remainder of the week.